Maya stopped retreating completely, and Vexathari seemed to realize for the first time that something fundamental had changed in their combat. The instructor's compound eyes tracked her movements with new attention as she began stalking forward. With predatory focus that had been hidden for 8 weeks, the human cadet who had struggled with basic techniques was gone. In her place stood something that moved with fluid precision and calculated aggression. Maya's green eyes had taken on an intensity that made several watching cadets step backward instinctively. Impossible, Vexathari muttered as Maya closed distance, with movements that borrowed from every species she had studied. "Humans do not fight like this," Maya answered, with a combination attack that forced the instructor to give ground for the first time since combat began. Her strikes were not individually powerful, but they came from unexpected angles with timing that disrupted traditional defensive patterns. She was fighting like no single species, but like all of them, combined Vexathari attempted to regain control with a devastating 4-limb combination that had ended countless previous fights. Maya had seen this exact sequence performed dozens of times during training sessions, and she knew exactly how to respond. She flowed around the attack like water while striking at the brief opening that appeared when Vexathari fully committed to the combination. Her counterattack landed cleanly against the instructor's side and drew the first sign of actual damage in the fight. The watching cadets erupted in shocked silence. No one had ever seen their most skilled instructor take a meaningful hit from a new cadet, especially not a human who had shown no particular combat ability before this moment. Maya pressed her advantage relentlessly. Every technique Vexathari used against her was something she had observed and analyzed during weeks of silent study. The instructor found itself fighting an opponent who seemed to know its every move before it was made. "This is not possible," Vexathari said as it was forced into purely defensive fighting. "Humans are not apex predators." Maya landed another strike that staggered the larger alien and spoke without breaking her aggressive rhythm. "You are right, instructor. We are not apex predators. We are something much more dangerous than that." She began demonstrating exactly what made humans unique in the galaxy. Where other species relied on natural advantages, humans adapted and improvised and learned. Maya shifted between fighting styles so rapidly that Vexathari could not predict what was coming next. A Saurian speed burst flowed into klaxon power techniques that transitioned seamlessly into ethereal misdirection. Maya was fighting like a dozen different species, while Vexathari struggled to adapt to patterns it had never encountered before. The instructor tried to use its superior reach and strength to regain control, but Maya had spent weeks studying klaxon physiology and combat preferences. She knew exactly how to neutralize those advantages through positioning and timing. Vexathari was breathing heavily now, and its movements had lost the fluid precision that had made it legendary among Academy instructors. The alien was discovering what it meant to face an opponent who had studied its every weakness while hiding her own capabilities. Maya could sense the exact moment when doubt entered her opponent's mind. Vexathari's attacks became desperate rather than calculated as the instructor realized it was no longer fighting a weak human cadet, but something far more dangerous. "What are you?" Vexathari gasped as Maya continued her relentless assault. "I am what humans actually are when we stop trying to be like everyone else," Maya replied as she landed a combination that sent the instructor stumbling backward. She was fighting with pure human instincts now. The persistence that had driven her species to hunt mammoths across frozen continents. The adaptability that had allowed humans to survive in every environment on Earth. The intelligence that turned every challenge into a learning opportunity. Vexathari made one final desperate attempt to end the fight with the traditional klaxon finishing technique. It was a devastating overhead strike, with all four limbs that had never failed against Academy opponents. Maya had been waiting for this exact moment since the combat began. She had seen Vexathari use this technique countless times and had studied every detail of its execution. When the instructor committed fully to the attack, Maya was already moving with perfect timing. She sidestepped the strike with millimeter precision while grabbing one of Vexathari's extended limbs. Using the instructor's own momentum against it, she executed a throwing technique that combined elements from 3 different species martial arts. Vexathari crashed to the training floor with Maya controlling its dominant arm in a joint lock that could have caused permanent damage if she chose to apply full pressure. The instructor was completely helpless, and everyone in the training area knew it. The silence was absolute, as Maya held her position without speaking. She had proven her point completely and definitively. The human cadet who had been dismissed, as weak prey had just defeated the Academy's most skilled combat instructor, yield? Vexathari said quietly after realizing the futility of continued resistance. Maya released the joint lock immediately and stepped back while offering her hand to help the instructor stand. Vexathari looked at the extended hand with surprise before accepting the assistance. The watching cadets remained silent as both fighters faced each other in the center of the combat circle. Maya had not just won a fight. She had changed fundamental assumptions about human capabilities and place in the galactic community. How? Vexathari asked simply as it regained its composure. Maya looked around at all the alien faces staring at her with new respect and understanding. Jake was grinning with pride while other human cadets stood straighter than they had in weeks. Humans are not just persistence hunters, instructor, Maya said clearly enough for everyone to hear. We are persistence predators. We do not just outlast our prey. We learn them and adapt to them and become them. That is what makes us dangerous. Vexathari nodded slowly as understanding dawned in its compound eyes. You were studying all of us from the beginning. Every species has natural advantages, but every advantage creates predictable patterns, Maya continued. Humans learn those patterns and find ways to exploit them. We do not have the strongest claws or the fastest reflexes, but we have something better. We have the ability to become whatever we need to be. The instructor looked around at the watching cadets before speaking again. I have been teaching combat for 20 years, and I have never encountered anything like what I just experienced. Rodriguez has demonstrated capabilities that require immediate reassessment of our training protocols. Maya felt a surge of satisfaction, but she kept her expression neutral. She had accomplished what she set out to do, but this was just the beginning. The Academy would need to learn how to train humans properly instead of trying to force them into alien molds. The combat assessment is concluded, Vexathari announced to the gathered cadets. Rodriguez has demonstrated exceptional predatory instinct and tactical adaptability. She will advance to specialized warfare training immediately. As the crowd began to disperse, Maya found herself surrounded by alien cadets who wanted to understand what they had just witnessed. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, she was not the quiet human who struggled with basic exercises. Jake approached with obvious excitement and pride. Maya, that was incredible. How did you know you could do that? Maya looked at her, fellow human, with a slight smile. I told you we were here for a reason, Jake. We just needed to figure out what our advantages actually were. Zeph Corlin appeared beside them with a very different expression than he had worn during their previous encounters. The Saurian who had dismissed human weakness now looked at Maya with something approaching wariness. "I underestimated you, human," Zeph said carefully. "That was a mistake I will not make again." Maya nodded politely, but her eyes held a predatory gleam that had not been there before. "Most species make that mistake, Zeph, but humans are very good at learning from the mistakes of others." As the training area emptied, Maya stood alone for a moment in the center of the combat circle. She was no longer the silent observer who had arrived 8 weeks ago. She was something new and dangerous and perfectly adapted to succeed in this environment. Maya Rodriguez had stopped being prey and started being the apex predator that humans were always meant to be. The combat circle seemed to expand around Maya as she faced instructor Vexithari. Every cadet in the training area pressed closer to get a better view of what everyone expected to be a very brief and one-sided demonstration. Maya could hear whispered conversations in alien languages, but she blocked out everything except the 8-foot-tall predator standing across from her. Vexithari moved into an aggressive klaxon combat stance with all 4 arms positioned for maximum striking power. Its compound eyes tracked every micro-movement Maya made while its razor-sharp claws extended fully. The instructor was not holding back or treating this as a training exercise. "Since you insist on this demonstration, Rodriguez, I will show these cadets what happens when prey pretends to be predator," Vexithari said in its grinding voice. "Perhaps your failure will teach the others about knowing their place in the natural order." Maya took a defensive position, but her mind was working on multiple levels. She had spent 8 weeks studying how Vexithari moved and fought and thought. Every technique demonstration and every sparring session had been a chance to learn about her opponent. Now she needed to use that information. The instructor attacked, without warning, using a traditional klaxon opening sequence that Maya had seen dozens of times. 4 arms moved in a complex pattern designed to overwhelm opponents with speed and power. Most cadets would have been defeated in the first exchange, but Maya was already moving before the attack fully developed. She rolled left and away from the primary strike zone while Vexithari's claws carved through empty air. The watching cadets gasped at the speed and ferocity of the attack, but Maya was not surprised. She had been expecting exactly this opening and had planned her response weeks ago. Vexithari followed up immediately with a spinning attack that utilized all 4 limbs in a devastating combination. Maya gave ground rapidly while deflecting what strikes she could and absorbing others on her arms and shoulders. To the watching cadets, it looked like she was barely surviving against superior skill and power, but Maya was not just defending randomly. Every retreat was calculated to move the combat toward a specific area of the training circle. Every block was designed to gather information about Vexithari's timing and preferred combinations. She was not trying to win the first exchange or even the second. She was playing a much longer game. Is this the best that human predator instinct can manage? Vexithari taunted as it pressed its advantage with obvious confidence. Running and hiding while hoping for mercy, Maya did not respond because she was too busy learning. She noticed that Vexithari favored high attacks when confident, and that its left side limbs moved a fraction slower than its right. Most importantly, she saw that the instructor was fighting for the audience as much as for victory. Every technique was displayed with flourish, and every combination was designed to look impressive. The pattern continued for several minutes with Vexithari attacking aggressively while Maya gave ground and defended desperately. The alien cadets cheered for their instructor while the few humans watched in growing dismay. Jake looked ready to intervene despite the obvious consequences, while other human cadets seemed resigned to another demonstration of their inadequacy. What none of them understood was that Maya was not losing. She was studying her opponent with the same intensity she had brought to every other aspect of Academy life. Every attack pattern was memorized, and every timing sequence was filed away for future use. More importantly, she was beginning to see the weaknesses in traditional Klaxon combat philosophy. Vexithari's techniques were devastating against opponents who fought in conventional ways, but they were also predictable once you understood the underlying patterns. The instructor had learned to fight other Klaxons and aliens who used similar approaches. None of them had ever faced an opponent who was willing to absorb punishment while gathering intelligence. Maya began to notice something else as the combat continued. Vexithari was breathing harder than it had been at the beginning. Klaxon physiology was built for explosive power rather than sustained effort, and the instructor was expending enormous energy on its impressive attack combinations. She started moving differently then. Instead of simply retreating, Maya began to circle and weave while forcing Vexithari to adjust direction constantly. She was not attacking yet, but she was no longer allowing the instructor to dictate the terms of engagement completely. "Stand still and fight prey," Vexithari snarled as Maya slipped away from another combination attack. "Real predators do not run endlessly." But Maya was not running anymore. She was testing and probing while her opponent grew more frustrated with each failed attempt to land a decisive blow. The watching cadets were beginning to sense a change in the dynamics, even if they could not identify exactly what was happening. Maya started incorporating techniques she had observed from other species. During her weeks of silent study, she used a Saurian evasion pattern to avoid a high attack, then shifted into an ethereal phase dodge to escape what should have been an unavoidable combination. None of the individual moves were perfect, but they were unexpected enough to disrupt Vexithari's rhythm. The instructor was forced to abandon its traditional attack sequences in favor of more reactive fighting. This was exactly what Maya had been waiting for, because reactive fighting meant Vexithari was no longer controlling the pace of combat. Maya pressed forward for the first time since the fight began. Her attacks were not powerful enough to threaten a Klaxon directly, but they served a different purpose. Each strike forced Vexithari to respond defensively, and each response provided more information about timing and reflexes. "What are you doing, Rodriguez?" Vexithari demanded, as it blocked a series of probing attacks. "This is not how combat works," Maya finally spoke for the first time since accepting the challenge. "You are right, instructor. This is not how your combat works." She began attacking with combinations borrowed from multiple species and adapted for human physiology. A resonant striking pattern flowed into a verdant grappling technique that transitioned seamlessly into a modified Saurian finishing move. None of it should have worked together, but Maya had spent weeks analyzing how different fighting styles could complement each other. Vexithari found itself defending against attacks it had never seen before. Every time the instructor adapted to one pattern, Maya shifted to something completely different. The watching cadets were silent now as they witnessed something unprecedented in Academy history. A human was not just surviving against their most skilled instructor. She was forcing Vexithari to fight defensively for the first time anyone could remember. Maya could see confusion and growing concern in the instructor's compound eyes. Vexithari had expected to demonstrate human weakness through overwhelming force, but instead was being forced to work harder than in any recent combat. The Klaxon's breathing was labored now, and its movements had lost some of their earlier precision, but Maya was just getting started. She had spent 8 weeks as prey studying predators, and now she was ready to show what humans were actually capable of when they stopped trying to be something they were not. She was tired of being silent and tired of being underestimated. Most of all, she was tired of watching aliens assume they understood what made humans dangerous. It was time to teach them about persistence and adaptability and the kind of predator that never gave up once it had chosen its prey. The 8th week brought advanced combat assessments, and Maya could feel the tension building throughout the academy. Cadets who failed to demonstrate adequate progress would be reassigned to support roles rather than combat tracks. For most species, this would be a minor setback, but for humans it felt like a confirmation of every doubt about their worthiness. Instructor Vexathari announced the evaluation criteria during morning assembly. The klaxon stood at the center of the great hall with its 4 arms spread wide and its compound eyes reflecting the light from above. Every cadet in the massive space was focused on its words. Combat effectiveness requires more than technique or strength, Vexathari said in its grinding voice. It requires the fundamental drive to dominate and destroy your enemies. What separates predator from prey is not size or speed, but the willingness to take life when necessary. Maya listened carefully while scanning the faces of her fellow humans. Jake looked determined but worried. Lisa appeared ready to faint from stress. Around them, hundreds of alien cadets sat with confidence born from generations of warrior traditions. The assessment will test your ability to think and fight under extreme pressure, the instructor continued. Those who demonstrate true predator instincts will advance to specialized warfare training. Those who prove themselves to be prey animals will find other ways to serve the galaxy. The first day of testing focused on individual combat skills. Maya watched as cadet after cadet demonstrated the techniques they had learned over the past 2 months. Saurians moved with deadly grace through complex attack sequences. Klaxons showed devastating power in their strikes. Ethereals phased through, simulated attacks with ghostly efficiency. When Maya's turn came, she performed adequately but nothing more. Her movements lacked the explosive power of stronger species and the fluid grace of more agile ones. She could see disappointment in the eyes of the evaluating instructors and heard whispered comments from watching cadets about human limitations. Jake performed with more energy and enthusiasm, but his results were similar to Maya's. Lisa struggled to complete even basic requirements, and Maya could see tears forming in her eyes as she stumbled through techniques that other species mastered easily. The second day brought weapons training evaluations. Maya had spent weeks practicing with energy rifles and plasma cannons designed for alien physiology. The weapons were too large for human hands, and their energy patterns were calibrated for nervous systems very different from her own. She managed to hit most of her targets, but her accuracy was poor compared to species with natural advantages in hand-eye coordination or enhanced visual systems. The resonance could sense target locations through vibrations, while the hive minds shared targeting data instantaneously between group members. Maya found herself thinking about the hunting rifles she had used on her home colony. Those weapons were designed for human hands and human reflexes. They required patience and careful aim rather than rapid-fire techniques. But that kind of weapon was considered primitive by galactic standards and was not part of academy training. The third day tested tactical thinking and problem-solving under pressure. Small groups of cadets were given combat scenarios and asked to develop solutions quickly. Maya was grouped with 2 saurians and a crystalline resonant who immediately took charge of the planning process. The scenario involved defending a space station against multiple attackers approaching from different vectors. Maya listened as her teammates proposed aggressive counterattacks and direct confrontations. Their solutions were bold and decisive, but Maya could see flaws in their reasoning. She tried to suggest alternative approaches that focused on controlling enemy movement and forcing them into disadvantageous positions, but her teammates dismissed her ideas as too passive. The Saurians especially seemed frustrated by what they saw as human overcautiousness. "Predators attack Rodriguez," said one of them with obvious annoyance. "They do not hide and hope their prey makes mistakes." Maya nodded and remained quiet, but she was thinking about pack hunters from her home world who used exactly those tactics to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Patience and coordination could overcome raw power if used correctly. The final evaluation was announced on the fourth day, and Maya felt her stomach tighten when she heard the details. Each cadet would face individual assessment by their primary combat instructor. For most, this meant demonstrating advanced techniques they had learned. For humans, it meant facing instructor Vexathari directly. Maya watched as other cadets went through their evaluations with varying degrees of success. Some passed easily, while others struggled with the pressure of individual attention. When Lisa's turn came, Maya could see her hands shaking as she attempted basic combat forms. Lisa's evaluation was painful to watch. Her movements were hesitant and awkward under Vexathari's critical gaze. When she failed to complete a defensive sequence properly, the instructor stopped the assessment with a sharp gesture. "Enough," Vexathari said with obvious disgust. "Kane, you have proven that some beings are simply not meant for combat roles. You will be reassigned to medical support where your instincts for preservation might actually be useful." Lisa burst into tears and ran from the training area, while other cadets watched in uncomfortable silence. Maya felt anger building in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She was learning that Vexathari enjoyed breaking cadets who could not meet his standards. Jake's evaluation went better, but not by much. He demonstrated competent technique, but lacked the aggressive instincts that Vexathari demanded. The instructor allowed him to complete his assessment, but his disappointment was obvious. "Adequate, Murphy, but barely," Vexathari said when Jake finished. "You have the basic skills, but you lack the killer instinct that separates warriors from soldiers. Combat is not a sport with rules and referees." Then it was Maya's turn, and she felt every eye in the training area focused on her as she stepped into the assessment circle. Vexathari loomed over her with its angular head tilted at an angle that suggested both curiosity and contempt. "Rodriguez, you have been remarkably quiet during your time here," the instructor said as it circled around her. "Your performance has been consistently mediocre, and your attitude suggests someone who does not belong in combat training." Maya stood at attention and said nothing. She was watching how Vexathari moved and noting the subtle signs of aggression in its posture. The klaxon was preparing to make an example of her just as it had with Lisa. "I have been wondering if humans possess any predatory instincts at all," Vexathari continued. "Your species talks about being warriors, but everything I have observed suggests you are pack hunters at best. You mistake coordination for predation and persistence for aggression." The watching cadets were completely silent now. Maya could feel Jake's tension from across the room and saw other humans shifting uncomfortably. This was about more than just her individual assessment. "So I am going to offer you a choice, Rodriguez," Vexathari said as it stopped directly in front of her. "You can attempt to demonstrate that you have any predatory capability whatsoever by facing me in single combat, or you can accept immediate reassignment to logistics training where your analytical nature might be more useful." Maya looked up at A. The towering alien instructor with its razor-sharp claws and compound eyes that missed nothing. She knew this was not really about assessment anymore. This was about putting humans in their place and confirming every assumption about their weakness. The entire training area was silent as Maya considered her options. She could walk away and accept that humans were not meant to be warriors in this galaxy. She could admit that her weeks of observation and analysis had been nothing more than the desperate attempts of prey trying to understand predators, or she could finally stop being silent. "I accept the combat assessment instructor, Maya," said clearly enough for everyone to hear. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Maya saw something like surprise in Vexathari's compound eyes. The alien instructor had expected her to choose the safe option and remove herself from combat training. "Are you certain, Rodriguez?" Vexathari asked with what might have been amusement. "This will not be a practice session with safety protocols. This will be actual combat to demonstrate actual predatory instinct." Maya looked around the silent training area at all the alien faces watching her. She saw doubt and pity and curiosity, but no expectation that she could actually succeed against one of the Academy's most skilled instructors. "I understand, instructor," Maya said as she moved into a ready position. For the first time in 8 weeks, Maya Rodriguez was not just observing anymore, she was hunting. The 4th week at the Academy brought advanced combat forms, and Maya found herself struggling more than ever with the physical demands. The klaxon fighting style that instructor Vexathari demonstrated required rapid strikes with multiple limbs, while maintaining perfect balance. Maya had only 2 arms, and her human reflexes seemed impossibly slow compared to her alien classmates. She watched as Zeph Corlan performed the same combination flawlessly. The Saurian moved like liquid lightning, with his scaled arms creating complex patterns in the air. Each strike would have been devastating to a human opponent, but Zeph made it look effortless. When he finished the sequence, Vexathari nodded approval. "Acceptable, Corlan," the instructor said. "Your species understands the nature of decisive action. Combat is not a debate or negotiation. It is about ending threats quickly and completely." Maya stepped forward when her name was called and attempted the same sequence. Her movements were clumsy compared to what she had just watched, and she could feel the eyes of every cadet on her failures. Her timing was off, and her balance wavered during the more complex transitions. When she finished, Vexathari looked at her with what might have been disgust. "This is exactly what I expected from a human Rodriguez," the instructor said as it towered over her. "Your species thinks too much and acts too slowly. Real predators do not hesitate or second-guess themselves. They strike with instinct and power." Maya said nothing, but she was paying attention to every word. She was also watching how Vexathari moved when it demonstrated techniques. The klaxon favored its right side limbs and always stepped with its left foot first when beginning an aggressive sequence. These were tiny details, but Maya filed them away with everything else she had observed. Jake performed better than Maya, but still drew criticism from Vexathari. His movements were more fluid than hers, but lacked the explosive power that seemed to impress their instructors. Lisa barely managed to complete the basic version of the sequence, and Maya could see her confidence crumbling with each failed attempt. During the break between sessions, Maya sat alone and watched her fellow cadets practice in small groups. Each species seemed to have natural advantages that humans simply could not match. The crystal-based resonance could predict incoming attacks by sensing vibrations through the ground. The plant-like verdants could extend and retract their limbs to incredible lengths. The gaseous aerials could partially disperse their bodies to avoid damage. She began to notice something else, though. Each species was also limited by their natural advantages. Saurians like Zeph were incredibly fast, but they seemed to have trouble with prolonged engagement. After several minutes of intense combat, their movements became predictable as their bodies overheated. The resonants were nearly impossible to surprise, but they struggled against airborne attacks that did not create ground vibrations. Maya started keeping mental notes about these patterns. She began to see combat not as a series of individual techniques, but as a complex system where every advantage came with corresponding weaknesses. The problem was that human advantages were not obvious in the types of exercises the Academy favored. The discrimination became more obvious as the weeks continued. During weapons training, Maya and the other humans were given simpler energy rifles, while aliens with better coordination received more advanced equipment. In tactical planning exercises, human suggestions were dismissed before they could be fully explained. Even in the dining facilities, humans found themselves sitting together not by choice, but because other species seemed to avoid their company. Jake became increasingly frustrated with the treatment they received. One evening, he approached Maya while she was observing a group of ethereal cadets practicing phase-shifting techniques. "This is ridiculous, Maya," Jake said as he sat down heavily beside her. "We are being treated like second-class citizens here. The instructors have already decided we do not belong, and they are not even giving us a fair chance to prove ourselves." Maya continued watching the ethereals as she responded. "What would proving ourselves look like, Jake?" "I do not know," he said with obvious irritation. "Maybe if we could just show them that humans can fight as well as anyone else. We have been warriors for thousands of years on Earth. We know about combat and strategy and survival." "But not their kind of combat," Maya said quietly. "They are trying to make us into something we are not instead of finding out what we actually are." Jake looked at her with confusion, but Maya did not elaborate. She was beginning to understand something important about the Academy and about herself, but she was not ready to share those thoughts yet. The real turning point came during a sparring session in the 6th week. Maya was paired against Zeph Corlin, and she knew she was about to be humiliated in front of the entire class. Zeph was one of the most skilled fighters among the new cadets, and he had made no secret of his contempt for human weakness. They faced each other in the practice ring while their classmates gathered around to watch. Zeph moved into a traditional Saurian combat stance with his weight forward and his clawed hands ready to strike. Maya took the defensive position she had been taught, but she was already thinking beyond the immediate confrontation. "Try not to embarrass your entire species too badly, human," Zeph said with a hissing laugh. Though I suppose that might be impossible at this point, Maya did not respond. She was watching how Zeph distributed his weight and noting the slight tension in his left shoulder that indicated his preferred attack pattern. When the match began, she had already decided not to try winning in any conventional sense. Zeph attacked immediately with a series of lightning-fast strikes that Maya barely managed to deflect. His claws carved through the air where her head had been moments before, and she felt the wind from his attacks against her skin. The watching cadets cheered for the Saurian as he pressed his advantage with obvious skill and power. Maya gave ground. Steadily, but she was not panicking. Instead, she was learning everything she could about how Zeph fought. She noticed that he always followed a successful high attack with a low sweep. She saw that he favored his right side when under pressure. Most importantly, she realized that he was fighting to impress the watching crowd rather than simply to defeat her. The match ended exactly as everyone expected. Zeph landed a controlled strike to Maya's chest that would have been lethal in real combat, and she went down hard. The alien cadets cheered while Jake and Lisa looked embarrassed. Instructor Vexthari used the outcome as another teaching moment about predator instincts and natural superiority. But Maya was not thinking about her defeat as she picked herself up from the training mat. She was thinking about everything she had learned during those few minutes of combat. Zeph was skilled and powerful, but he was also predictable. His techniques were traditional Saurian forms that worked well against other Saurians, but might not be as effective against an opponent who fought differently. Perhaps next time, Rodriguez, you will remember that combat is not a study session, Vexathari said as Maya walked past. Real predators do not have time to think during a fight. They act on instinct. Maya nodded politely, but she was thinking that maybe the instructor was wrong about what made an effective predator. On her home colony, the most dangerous creatures were not the ones that relied on raw power or speed. They were the ones that adapted to their environment and learned from their prey. That evening, Maya sat in her room and thought about everything she had observed since arriving at the academy. She had been approaching her training all wrong. Instead of trying to become better at alien fighting techniques, she needed to figure out what humans were naturally good at and find ways to use those advantages. She thought about the predators she had encountered on her frontier world. The most successful ones were not the biggest or strongest. They were the ones that could wait patiently for the right opportunity and adapt their hunting strategies to different types of prey. They were persistent and clever, and they never gave up once they had chosen a target. Maya Rodriguez was beginning to understand that she had been hunting all along. She just had not realized what her prey was yet. Maya Rodriguez stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive towers of the Galactic Defense Academy. The buildings stretched high into the orange sky of planet Kepler 442b, and she could see alien cadets moving through the transparent walkways between structures. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and her green eyes moved constantly as she took in every detail of her new home for the next 2 years. The Academy accepted only the best warriors from across the galaxy, and Maya knew she was lucky to be here. Only 3 humans had been chosen this cycle, and she was determined not to waste this chance. She picked up her single bag and walked toward the main entrance where other new cadets were gathering. The first alien she saw up close was tall with blue skin and 4 arms. It spoke in a voice that sounded like music to another creature that looked like a walking tree. Maya listened carefully, even though she could not understand their language. She was already learning that every species moved differently and spoke differently, and these differences might be important. Later, Jake Murphy appeared beside her with a wide grin on his face. He was the second human accepted this year, and Maya had met him briefly during their journey here. Jake was tall and broad with sandy hair, and he seemed excited about everything. He looked around at the aliens with obvious wonder and started talking immediately. "Can you believe this place, Maya?" Jake said as he gestured at the towering buildings. "Look at all these different species working together. This is going to be amazing." Maya nodded, but did not say much. She was watching a group of reptilian creatures that moved with quick, jerky motions. Their eyes darted around constantly and their hands never stayed still. She filed this information away for later use. The third human, Lisa Kane, joined them a few minutes later. Lisa was shorter than Maya, with blonde hair and nervous blue eyes. She kept looking around at the aliens with obvious worry and stayed close to the other humans. "I heard some of these species can bench press a small vehicle," Lisa whispered to Maya and Jake. "How are we supposed to compete with that kind of strength?" Maya did not answer, but she was thinking the same thing. Humans were not the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy, but they were here for a reason. She just needed to figure out what that reason was. The orientation began in a massive hall that could hold thousands of cadets. Maya sat between Jake and Lisa and watched as representatives from different species gave speeches about honor and duty and protecting the galaxy. She was not really listening to the words. Instead, she was studying how each alien moved and stood and gestured. Instructor Vexathari took the stage, and the entire hall went quiet. The klaxon was nearly 8 feet tall, with a body that looked like it was made of dark green armor. Its 4 arms ended in sharp claws, and its head was angular with compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. "Cadets, you are here because your species believes you have potential," Vexathari said, as it looked across the crowd. "But potential means nothing without the will to use it. Combat is not about fairness or equality. It is about survival and victory. Some of you will prove you have the instincts of a predator. Others will learn they are prey." Maya felt Jake tense beside her and saw Lisa shrink down in her seat. But Maya just watched and listened. She had grown up on a frontier colony where predators were a real threat, and she knew the difference between something that hunted and something that survived. By running, the next few days were filled with medical exams and placement tests and room assignments. Maya found herself sharing quarters with a tall, silver-skinned alien named Sira, who could apparently see in multiple light spectrums. Sira was polite but distant, and Maya was fine with that arrangement. The real learning began when combat training started. Maya had expected physical challenges, but she had not expected to feel so completely outclassed by every other species. The Saurian cadets like Zeph Corlin moved with lightning speed, and their scales could deflect most basic weapons. The insectoid hive mind cadets worked together with perfect coordination. The energy-based ethereal cadets could phase through solid. Matter Jake threw himself into every exercise with enthusiasm, but Maya could see he was struggling too. He was strong for a human, but weak compared to most aliens. Lisa barely managed to keep up with the basic requirements, and Maya could see doubt growing in her eyes every day. Maya chose a different approach. While other cadets focused on trying to match the physical abilities of stronger species, Maya focused on watching and learning. During sparring sessions, she would lose quickly, but she would study how her opponent moved and fought. During weapons training, she would note which techniques worked best against which types of physiology. Her silence was noticed by other cadets and instructors. Some thought she was afraid or overwhelmed. Others assumed she was not intelligent enough to keep up with the advanced training. Maya let them think whatever they wanted while she continued to observe and catalog information. Instructor Vexathari seemed particularly dismissive of the human cadets. During one weapons demonstration, the klaxon made a point of explaining how certain energy weapons were too advanced for primitive mammalian nervous systems to handle effectively. When Jake raised his hand to ask a question, Vexathari cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Questions are for those who can comprehend the answers, Murphy," the instructor said in its grinding voice. "Focus on mastering the basics before you attempt to understand advanced concepts." Maya watched this interaction carefully. She was learning that Vexathari did not just dislike humans, but actively looked down on them. This was useful information, though she was not sure how yet. In the evenings, Maya would sit in the common areas and continue her observations. She noticed that Saurian cadets always ate alone and never showed their backs to other species. Hive mind. Cadets moved in small groups and seemed to communicate without speaking. Ethereal cadets avoided physical contact with anyone and never stayed in one location for very long. Jake often tried to engage Maya in conversation about their training or their fellow cadets, but Maya kept her responses short. She was not being unfriendly, but she was focused on learning everything she could about this new environment. Every detail might be important someday. Lisa approached Maya one evening after a particularly difficult day of combat training. Her eyes were red, and Maya could see she had been crying. "I do not think I belong here, Maya," Lisa said quietly. "Everyone else is so much stronger and faster. The instructors barely notice we exist, except to point out our mistakes. Maybe humans are not meant to be warriors." Maya looked at her fellow human carefully before responding. "We are here for a reason, Lisa. The Academy does not make mistakes about admissions. We just need to figure out what our advantages are." Lisa did not look convinced, but she nodded and walked away. Maya went back to watching a group of crystal-based aliens who seemed to communicate through light patterns. She was beginning to see that every species had strengths and weaknesses. The trick was learning to recognize and exploit those weaknesses while hiding your own. 3 weeks into training, Maya had still barely spoken during classes or training sessions. Her instructors had written her off as a slow learner, and her fellow cadets had stopped trying to engage her in conversation. This suited Maya perfectly because it meant she could observe without being observed herself. She was becoming a student of combat in ways that none of her instructors had intended. While they taught traditional fighting forms and weapon techniques, Maya was learning the deeper patterns that governed how different species thought and moved and reacted under pressure. Maya Rodriguez was still the quiet human cadet who struggled with basic exercises, but she was also becoming something else. She was becoming a predator who understood that the hunt began long before the first strike was thrown.